A 3-year-old girl sleeps in the hospital corridor every night, the reason that brought a millionaire to tears. In the dimly lit corridor of St. Mary's Medical Center, a tiny figure lay curled up on a hard plastic chair, her small body wrapped in a thin hospital blanket. 3-year-old Emma Miller clutched her worn teddy bear, its matted fur telling stories of countless nights spent in this same hallway. Her golden curls, tangled and unkempt, framed a face peaceful in slumber, unaware of the whispers and concerned glances from passing staff. Night security guard Frank Thompson paused during his rounds, his weathered face softening at the sight. For the past week, he'd watched this little girl sleeping here, her presence a heartbreaking mystery that haunted the hospital's night shift. Tonight, something was different. Her usual pink dress seemed more worn, and her small shoes were scuffed beyond repair. What Frank didn't know was that this child's presence would soon capture the attention of Robert Wilson, the city's most notorious real estate mogul, and unravel a story that would shake the foundations of his carefully constructed world. In a small apartment on the outskirts of Boston, life for Emma and Sarah Miller had once been filled with simple joys. Emma, with her perpetual smile and curious blue eyes, was known throughout their former neighborhood for her gentle way with stray cats and her habit of offering dandelions to strangers. Despite being only 3, she carried herself with an old soul's grace, perhaps sensing the weight her mother carried. Sarah Miller, at 28, bore little resemblance to the confident pediatrician she'd been just 2 years ago. Her once pristine medical coat had been replaced by worn waitress uniforms, then hospital gowns. The transformation from respected doctor to struggling single mother had been swift and merciless. The twist of fate began with a misdiagnosis not her own, but one she was wrongly blamed for. A powerful family's influence had ensured her medical license was suspended, though the truth would later reveal a far more complex story. Their life before the hospital had been modest but dignified. Sarah worked double shifts at local diners, scheduling her hours around Emma's daycare. Their tiny one-bedroom apartment, though sparse in furnishings, overflowed with handmade art projects and bedtime storybooks. Every night, Sarah would create shadow puppets on the wall, turning their financial struggles into magical adventures for Emma's entertainment. The first signs of Sarah's illness were subtle fatigue she attributed to long hours, pain she dismissed as stress. By the time she couldn't ignore the symptoms anymore, the cancer had spread. The cruel irony of a former doctor becoming a patient in her own hospital system wasn't lost on her colleagues, though few remembered her from her medical days. Their descent into poverty was methodical. First went the car, then their savings, and finally their apartment. Each sacrifice was wrapped in Sarah's fierce determination to shield Emma from their harsh reality. She sold everything except Emma's beloved teddy bear, a gift from her first day of medical residency to her newborn daughter. The bear, named Dr. Fuzzy, had been Emma's constant companion through every move, every goodbye, every night spent in increasingly desperate circumstances. What set Emma apart wasn't just her situation, but her response to it. While other children her age threw tantrums in toy stores, Emma spent her days creating elaborate stories for her stuffed animals in hospital waiting rooms. She turned supply closets into castles and treatment rooms into spaceships, her imagination transforming their grim reality into something bearable. Even the hospital staff, hardened by years of witnessing suffering, found themselves moved by the little girl who offered to share her last cookie with crying patients. Sarah had always taught Emma that kindness was free, even when nothing else was. This lesson manifested in unexpected ways, Emma leaving drawings for the janitorial staff, blowing kisses to elderly patients, and saving portions of her hospital cafeteria meals for the stray cat that lived in the parking lot. Her presence in the hospital corridors became a kind of living reminder of resilience, though few knew the full extent of her story. Now, as their situation grew more desperate, Emma's natural empathy seemed to deepen. She developed an uncanny ability to sense when others were in pain, often appearing with her teddy bear to offer comfort to strangers in distress. It was this very quality that would soon catch the attention of someone who could change their lives forever, though neither Emma nor Sarah could have predicted the complicated web of connections that were about to be revealed. Robert Wilson stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, his reflection ghosting against the Boston skyline he'd helped shape. At 45, he'd built Wilson Real Estate into a billion-dollar empire, but success had come at a devastating personal cost. His fingers traced the silver frame of a photograph on his desk, his daughter Catherine and wife Elizabeth, both gone within a year of each other, leaving him alone in his marble and steel kingdom. 5 years ago, Catherine had succumbed to an aggressive form of cancer at age 4, despite having access to the world's best medical care. Elizabeth, consumed by grief, died in a car accident 6 months later, though many whispered it wasn't entirely accidental. The double tragedy transformed Robert from a ruthless but fair businessman into someone his oldest employees barely recognized. His signature project, luxury hospital wings for the wealthy, became an obsession, as if building enough of them could somehow turn back time. Known in the press as the developer who never blinks, Robert had earned a reputation for acquiring properties through whatever means necessary. His latest project involved demolishing a lower-income housing complex to build high-end medical facilities. The irony that he'd displaced dozens of families, including several with sick children, was something he forced himself not to dwell on. Business was business, he told himself, even as Catherine's photo seemed to judge him silently. The public saw him as a paradox, a philanthropist who donated millions to children's cancer research while simultaneously making healthcare less accessible to the poor. His annual charity gala raised record amounts for pediatric care, yet his development projects often resulted in community health centers being shut down. This contradiction earned him both admiration and contempt, though few dared express the latter openly. In his private moments, Robert was haunted by memories. Catherine's favorite purple dinosaur still sat in his home office, untouched. Elizabeth's garden, once vibrant with roses, now maintained by staff, bloomed for no one. He channeled his grief into work, building higher, buying more, as if success could fill the void they'd left behind. His board of directors celebrated his increased productivity, while his therapist warned of unprocessed trauma. The only reminder of his former self was his weekly ritual of visiting the children's ward of St. Mary's Medical Center, though few knew about these quiet Sunday morning visits. He would arrive before visiting hours, walking the halls alone, occasionally leaving anonymous donations for families struggling with medical bills. These moments of connection to his past life were carefully guarded secrets, maintained by a select few loyal staff members. Yet, despite his wealth and influence, Robert Wilson remained fundamentally alone. His massive penthouse echoed with emptiness, his dinner table set for one. Board meetings and charity functions filled his calendar, but not the hollow space in his chest where family used to be. He'd built an empire on the principle that everything had a price, only to learn too late that what he truly valued couldn't be bought at any cost. Little did he know that fate was about to force him to confront not only his past decisions but also the very foundations of his beliefs about wealth, power, and redemption. The sight of a small girl sleeping in a hospital hallway would soon shatter his carefully constructed walls, leading to discoveries that would challenge everything he thought he knew about family, love, and the true cost of business decisions made without heart. At St. Mary's Medical Center, head nurse Jane Thompson's reputation preceded her. After 23 years in pediatric oncology, she'd developed an almost supernatural ability to know which patients needed her most. At 45, her auburn hair now streaked with gray, Jane ran her ward with a perfect balance of efficiency and compassion that younger staff members strived to emulate. Her office door, decorated with countless children's drawings, told the story of lives touched over decades of service. Dr. Michael Anderson, the chief of pediatric oncology, carried the weight of his position in the slight stoop of his shoulders. At 50, he'd seen enough success and failure to know that medicine wasn't just about protocols and procedures. His current ethical dilemma: watching Emma Miller sleep in the hallway while hospital policy prevented them from providing her a proper bed, ate at him nightly. The rules were clear: only patients could stay overnight. Yet every morning he found himself bringing an extra breakfast tray to the small girl who had captured the entire staff's hearts. The regular hospital staff had formed an unofficial support network around Emma and Sarah. Jessica Martinez, the night shift nurse, always made sure Emma had a fresh blanket. Tom Parker, the security guard, would pretend not to notice when Emma snuck into the staff break room to watch cartoons on the small TV. Even Mrs. Henderson, the cafeteria manager, regularly found extra portions that would mysteriously make their way to the little girl. But beneath their united front of care lay a growing unease. The hospital administration, pressured by recent budget cuts and corporate oversight, had begun strictly enforcing policies about non-patient overnight stays. The staff watched helplessly as similar cases were turned away, families separated by cold institutional rules. Their attempts to bend these rules for Emma and Sarah walked an increasingly dangerous line. The tension reached the hospital board, where Dr. Anderson found himself defending his staff's actions while trying to maintain professional objectivity. "We took an oath to do no harm," he argued in closed-door meetings. Forcing a 3-year-old onto the street at night isn't that harm, but the board, concerned with liability and precedent, remained unmoved. Jane Thompson had seen this pattern before: the slow grinding of bureaucratic wheels against human necessity. She'd witnessed too many families broken by the intersection of illness and poverty, too many children lost not to disease but to a system that valued profits over people. Her retirement was just 2 years away, but cases like Emma's made her wonder if she could last that long. The hospital staff's daily routine became a careful dance of compassion and compliance. They documented everything meticulously while simultaneously finding creative ways to provide care beyond the official scope. Supply closets were accidentally left unlocked, containing extra pillows and snacks. Staff breaks were coordinated to ensure someone always had an eye on Emma. Each small act of kindness was a quiet rebellion against a system they'd sworn to serve but increasingly struggled to respect. What none of them could predict was how their small acts of defiance would soon intersect with Robert Wilson's world, creating a storm that would force everyone from the night janitor to the hospital board to question what they truly valued in healthcare. The coming weeks would test not just their professional ethics but their very understanding of what it meant to heal. The evening Robert Wilson first encountered Emma Miller would change the trajectory of multiple lives. He'd arrived at St. Mary's Medical Center well after visiting hours, a time he preferred for his anonymous inspections of potential property acquisitions. The hospital board was considering his proposal to transform the aging facility into a state-of-the-art private medical center, and he wanted to assess the building personally, away from the choreographed tours and rehearsed presentations. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he walked the quiet corridors, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the worn linoleum. That's when he saw her, a small figure curled up on a row of plastic chairs, clutching a teddy bear that had seen better days. Robert stopped, his practiced professional detachment cracking at the sight. The child couldn't have been older than his Catherine had been. His first instinct was to call security, but something made him pause. The girl's pink dress, though clean, was worn at the edges, and her tiny shoes showed signs of careful repair. A hospital blanket had been tucked around her shoulders, suggesting the staff knew of her presence. As he stood there, uncertain for the first time in years, a night nurse approached quietly. "That's Emma," she whispered, recognizing the notorious developer but choosing to focus on the child. "She's here every night." Her mother's in terminal care upstairs. The nurse's tone carried a subtle challenge, daring him to object to the child's presence. Robert found himself drawn closer, memories of Catherine threatening to breach the carefully constructed walls around his heart. He noticed a small notebook clutched in Emma's hand, its pages filled with childish drawings of doctors, nurses, and what appeared to be a woman in a hospital bed. The artwork was surprisingly detailed for one so young, reminiscent of Catherine's own artistic tendencies. "How long?" he asked, his voice rougher than intended. "Almost 2 weeks now," the nurse replied. "Her mother sold everything for treatment. They have nowhere else to go." She hesitated before adding, "The building they lived in was demolished for redevelopment." The words hit Robert like a physical blow. He knew exactly which building she meant, the Hampton Street Apartments, one of his recent acquisitions. His company had cleared the property just months ago for a luxury medical plaza project. The irony twisted in his gut like a knife. Emma stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about Dr. Fuzzy, presumably the well-loved teddy bear in her arms. Robert found himself reaching for his phone, then stopping. His usual solution of throwing money at problems suddenly felt inadequate, almost obscene. As he stood there, more details emerged through conversation with the nurse. Sarah Miller, Emma's mother, had once been a respected pediatrician at this very hospital. A series of circumstances, a misdiagnosis controversy, a suspended license, mounting medical bills had stripped away everything except her determination to give Emma a chance at life. Robert spent the next hour in the hospital corridor, making calls that would normally wait until morning. Background checks were initiated, files were pulled, and his team began piecing together the Miller family story. Each new detail added layers of complexity to what had initially seemed a simple case of poverty. By midnight, he had a preliminary report. The Hampton Street property had been acquired through his company's standard procedures, legal notices sent, compensation offered, deadlines enforced. Everything had been by the book. Yet standing there watching Emma sleep in a hospital hallway by the book suddenly felt hollow. The final piece of information arrived via text, a photo of Sarah Miller from her days as a practicing physician. Robert's hand began to shake. He recognized her immediately. She had been part of Catherine's medical team during those final, desperate months. The connection struck him with the force of revelation, forcing him to sit heavily in one of the plastic chairs. Emma shifted in her sleep, the movement drawing his attention back to the present. In the harsh fluorescent light, her vulnerability was stark. Robert Wilson, the man known for never blinking in business negotiations, found himself unable to look away from this small, unconscious testament to the real cost of his empire's expansion. What began as a routine property inspection had become something far more complicated. As he finally left the hospital that night, Robert knew his life had reached a turning point, though he couldn't yet see where it would lead. In room 742 of the oncology ward, Sarah Miller lay awake, staring at the ceiling she'd memorized over countless sleepless nights. The pain medication dulled the physical agony, but did nothing to ease the mental torture of knowing her daughter slept on hospital chairs while she lay helpless. Through her window, she could see the gleaming tower of Wilson Enterprises, a cruel reminder of the home they'd lost. The progression of her illness had been ruthlessly swift. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, the diagnosis she'd delivered to countless patients during her medical career, now defined her own remaining days. The cruel irony wasn't lost on her. She'd once stood on the other side of such conversations, offering hope wrapped in careful medical terminology. Now, she understood the true weight of those carefully chosen words. Sarah's medical knowledge was both a blessing and a curse. She understood exactly what each new test result meant, could interpret every shadow on her scans. The oncology team, many of whom had been her colleagues, struggled to maintain professional distance. Dr. Anderson, who had once been her mentor, now avoided making eye contact during rounds, his voice catching whenever he had to deliver bad news. Her hospital room walls were covered with Emma's drawings, bright, hopeful scenes of mothers and daughters holding hands under sunny skies. Each artwork was a dagger to Sarah's heart, knowing these crayon-rendered dreams would never come true. The latest drawings showed their old apartment building with a big red X through it, Emma's way of processing their loss of home. The financial devastation had been complete. First went her savings, carefully built over years of medical practice. Then the car, sold to cover the first rounds of treatment. The apartment's security deposit had paid for Emma's winter coat. Each sacrifice had seemed temporary, a stepping stone toward recovery, until the eviction notice arrived from Wilson Real Estate. The irony of being displaced by luxury medical facilities wasn't lost on her. During her lucid moments, Sarah wrote letters to Emma, pages of motherly advice, memories, and hopes for a future she wouldn't see. She documented everything from Emma's favorite bedtime stories to her allergies, desperate to leave something of herself behind. The hospital social worker had gently suggested foster care arrangements, but Sarah couldn't bear the thought of separating from Emma during her final months. The nights were the hardest. From her bed, she could hear the quiet footsteps of nurses checking on Emma in the hallway. The staff's kindness was overwhelming: secret snacks, extra blankets, turned blind eyes to policy violations. Yet each act of mercy reminded Sarah of how far she'd fallen from her own days in a white coat, when she'd been the one offering help, rather than receiving it. The most painful moments came during Emma's daily visits. Her daughter had developed an uncanny ability to sense when Sarah was having a bad day, climbing carefully onto the bed to share stories about her hallway adventures. Emma spoke of the friendly janitor who taught her magic tricks, the night nurse who sneaked her pudding cups, creating a whole world from the hospital corridors that had become her playground. Sarah's medical training couldn't prevent her from calculating the odds, from knowing that each day brought them closer to an inevitable separation. The experimental treatments she'd once recommended to her own patients were now financially out of reach. The bitter truth was that money, not medicine, would determine her remaining time with Emma. In her more desperate moments, Sarah found herself praying not for healing but for solutions, anyone who could ensure Emma's future. Her daughter's resilience both inspired and devastated her. No 3-year-old should have to be so strong, so adaptable to tragedy. Yet Emma somehow maintained her gentle spirit, offering her teddy bear to crying patients, sharing her meager possessions with others she deemed more needy. The dawn light was beginning to filter through her window when Sarah heard familiar little footsteps approaching her room. Another day was beginning, another day of fighting, of pretending strength she no longer possessed, of trying to create memories that would have to last Emma a lifetime. As her door creaked open and Emma's sleep-tousled head appeared, Sarah forced a smile, pushing aside her pain. In these precious moments, she couldn't afford the luxury of despair. What Sarah couldn't know was that fate, in its mysterious way, was about to intervene through the most unlikely of sources. The man whose company had taken their home would soon become entangled in their lives in ways none of them could predict. The story of Emma Miller, the little girl who slept in St. Mary's hallways, first broke on local news through a rookie reporter's human interest piece. Lucy Chen had been covering a routine hospital board meeting when she spotted Emma sharing her lunch with an elderly patient. Within days, the story went viral, sparking a fierce debate about healthcare, homelessness, and the human cost of urban development. Social media exploded with opposing narratives. Some praised the hospital staff's compassion in allowing Emma to stay, while others criticized the facility for not providing proper accommodation. Emma's miracle and healthcare failure trended simultaneously, reflecting the community's divided response. Local news stations parked their vans outside St. Mary's, hoping to capture footage of the little girl who'd become an unwitting symbol of America's healthcare crisis. The hospital board found itself under intense scrutiny. Anonymous sources leaked details about recent policy changes that prioritized private patients, linking these decisions to negotiations with Wilson Enterprises. Dr. Anderson faced increasing pressure to enforce overnight stay regulations, even as public sentiment rallied behind Emma and Sarah. The hospital's PR department worked overtime, trying to balance sympathy with policy compliance. Local churches and community organizations mobilized, organizing prayer vigils and fundraisers. The First Baptist Church set up a donation fund, while the Neighborhood Association coordinated meal deliveries. Yet these well-meaning efforts highlighted a deeper problem: individual charity couldn't fix a broken system. Some donors expressed frustration that their contributions barely dented the massive medical bills. The story took an unexpected turn when former residents of the Hampton Street apartments recognized Sarah's name. Their testimonies about the displacement caused by Wilson Enterprises' development project added fuel to the controversy. Community activists organized protests outside Wilson's corporate headquarters, demanding accountability for the impact of luxury development on vulnerable populations. Social workers and healthcare advocates used Emma's story to illustrate the gaps in the system. They pointed out how a former pediatrician could fall through society's safety nets, ending up homeless while fighting cancer. Medical students at nearby universities organized discussions about healthcare accessibility, using Sarah's case as a stark example of systemic failures. The hospital staff found themselves in an uncomfortable spotlight. Nurses were interviewed by news outlets, carefully choosing their words to protect their jobs while advocating for change. Jane Thompson emerged as an unofficial spokesperson, her decades of experience lending weight to her measured calls for policy reform. Her quiet dignity in defending Emma's presence resonated with viewers, humanizing what could have been just another statistical debate. Local businesses near the hospital began offering support in small ways. The cafe across the street provided free meals to Emma and any staff member who watched over her. A nearby hotel quietly offered their conference room for hospital staff meetings discussing the situation, away from media attention. These grassroots efforts created a network of support that transcended official channels. As public interest grew, so did the complexity of responses. Real estate developers defended necessary urban renewal, while healthcare advocates pointed to the human cost of unchecked development. Emma's story became a Rorschach test for society's values, different groups seeing in it confirmation of their existing beliefs about capitalism, healthcare, and social responsibility. What none of these well-meaning observers could know was how their collective response would affect the key players in this unfolding drama. The public attention would soon force decisions and revelations that would change not just Emma and Sarah's lives, but the entire community's understanding of responsibility, redemption, and the true meaning of wealth. The mounting pressure from all sides was building toward a crisis point that would force everyone involved, from hospital administrators to real estate moguls, to confront the real implications of their choices. As Emma continued her nightly vigil in the hospital hallway, unaware of the storm surrounding her, the stage was being set for a confrontation that would challenge the very foundations of power and privilege in their city. In his penthouse office, Robert Wilson sat surrounded by files that painted a damning picture of his company's role in the Millers tragedy. His private investigators had been thorough, tracing Sarah Miller's journey from respected pediatrician to homeless cancer patient. Each document added another layer of guilt to his already heavy conscience. The Hampton Street development file lay open on his desk, bearing his own signature. The relocation assistance offered to residents had been legally adequate but practically insufficient. Sarah Miller's name appeared on a list of tenants who had requested medical hardship extensions requests that had been summarily denied by his legal team. The timing couldn't have been worse. Her eviction notice had arrived the same week as her cancer diagnosis. More disturbing were the connections his team had uncovered. Sarah Miller hadn't just been any doctor, she'd been part of the team that treated Catherine during her final months. Robert's hands trembled as he reviewed hospital records from 5 years ago. There was Sarah, then Dr. Miller, noted for spending extra hours with Catherine, reading her stories long after her shift had ended. His daughter had even mentioned her in her journal. Dr. Sarah makes the medicine less scary. The irony was brutal. His company's actions had destroyed the life of someone who had shown kindness to his dying child. Robert found himself watching security footage of Emma sleeping in the hallway, her small form curled around the same teddy bear Catherine had owned. The parallel was almost too painful to bear. His investigation revealed more uncomfortable truths. The luxury medical center planned for the Hampton Street site would have been inaccessible to patients like Sarah, the very healthcare workers who had once staffed it. The project's marketing materials, with their promises of exclusive care for discerning clients, now seemed obscene. Robert's executive team was growing concerned about his obsession with the Miller case. His assistant reported worried whispers about his stability, about how the similarity to Catherine's story might be affecting his judgment. But for the first time in years, Robert felt clarity cutting through his grief-induced fog. He began making discreet inquiries about Sarah's medical care. The treatments she needed, experimental therapies and specialized care, were available at his private medical facilities. The cost would be astronomical, but money had never been an obstacle for him before. Yet when he approached her room that morning, intending to offer help, he witnessed something that stopped him cold. Emma sat on her mother's bed, carefully feeding Sarah soup from the hospital cafeteria. The child's face showed a determination beyond her years as she wiped her mother's chin with a paper napkin. Sarah's eyes held a mixture of love and heartbreak that Robert recognized from Elizabeth's final days with Catherine. This wasn't a problem he could solve by throwing money at it. The media attention was growing, with reporters drawing direct lines between Wilson Enterprises' development practices and the human cost to families like the Millers. His Puerto Rico team prepared statements about job creation and economic growth, but Robert found himself unable to approve them. The rehearsed corporate speak rang hollow against the reality of that little girl sleeping in a hospital hallway. His investigation had one final, devastating revelation. The controversial incident that had led to Sarah's medical license suspension, a misdiagnosis that had allegedly endangered a patient, had been orchestrated by a powerful family with connections to his own board of directors. They had needed a scapegoat for their son's medical condition, and Sarah, with her dedication to truth over political expedience, had been an easy target. Robert stood at his office window, watching the sun rise over the city he'd helped build. His empire was built on the principle that everything had a price, that progress required sacrifice. But staring at Emma's drawing of her former home, now tucked into his desk drawer, he questioned what true progress looked like. The press was calling for statements, the board was demanding action, and his lawyers were warning about precedent. For the first time in his career, Robert Wilson found himself completely uncertain about his next move. The ruthless businessman who had never hesitated to make tough decisions now faced a choice between protecting his empire and redeeming his humanity. What he didn't know was that his investigation had stirred up forces beyond his control. The truth about Sarah's past was about to collide with his present in ways that would shake the foundations of everything he'd built. The truth about Sarah Miller emerged not through Robert's investigation, but through an unexpected source. Dr. Anderson, reviewing old case files late one night, discovered a connection that had been deliberately buried. 5 years ago, Sarah had been the whistleblower in a case involving experimental cancer treatments at the hospital's private wing, the same wing where Catherine Wilson had received her final treatments. The documents revealed a devastating story. Sarah had discovered irregularities in the trial protocols, treatments being pushed through without proper safety measures. Her initial reports were ignored, then actively suppressed. When she persisted, raising concerns about patient safety, particularly regarding young children in the trial, the hospital board had moved swiftly to discredit her. The misdiagnosis scandal that ended her career had been fabricated. Sarah had correctly diagnosed a prominent businessman's son with a rare genetic condition, but the family refused to accept the diagnosis. They wanted a more treatable explanation for their child's symptoms. When Sarah refused to change her diagnosis, the family used their influence to have her medical license suspended. Hospital records showed Sarah had been one of the most dedicated pediatric oncologists on staff. Her patients had the highest survival rates in the department, and her innovative approach to pain management in children had been published in leading medical journals. Former colleagues described her as brilliant but uncompromising when it came to patient care, a quality that ultimately made her dangerous to those with something to hide. Most shocking was the connection to Robert Wilson's daughter. Sarah had been Catherine's primary oncologist until just weeks before the child's death. Her removal from the case coincided with her raising concerns about the experimental treatment protocols. The timing suggested a darker truth had Sarah been right about the treatments. Had her silence been bought with the threat of professional ruin? Dr. Anderson found himself staying late into the night, piecing together the puzzle. Notes in Catherine's file, written in Sarah's distinctive hand, showed her fighting to explore alternative treatments, arguing against the aggressive protocols that ultimately failed. Her final entry, dated just days before her removal, read patient's condition deteriorating. Recommend immediate discontinuation of experimental protocol. Request urgent review of treatment plan. The evidence painted a picture of a doctor who had sacrificed everything to protect her patients. Sarah had lost her career, her reputation, and ultimately her home, all because she refused to compromise her medical ethics. Now, in a twist of fate that seemed almost too cruel, she found herself dying in the very hospital where she had once fought to save others. Former nurses came forward quietly, sharing stories of Sarah's dedication. She had spent countless unpaid hours with terminal patients, organized support groups for parents, and used her own money to help families afford treatments. One nurse recalled finding Sarah asleep in a patient's room after a 36-hour shift, having promised the frightened child she wouldn't leave. The most damning evidence came from a sealed deposition where Sarah had testified about the dangers of rushing experimental treatments for financial gain. She had named names, including several board members who had financial stakes in the pharmaceutical companies behind the trials. Her testimony had been buried, her concerns dismissed as professional jealousy. As Dr. Anderson compiled the evidence, the full weight of the injustice became clear. Sarah's current situation, homeless, terminally ill, protecting her daughter in hospital hallways, was the direct result of her refusal to compromise her principles. The system hadn't just failed her, it had actively worked to destroy her for trying to protect its most vulnerable patients. The connection to Robert Wilson added another layer of complexity. Sarah had fought to save his daughter, had recognized the dangers of the treatment protocol, and had been silenced for her efforts. Now, years later, his company's actions had left her homeless during her own battle with cancer. The irony was as cruel as it was complete. Dr. Anderson faced a moral dilemma. Revealing this information could bring justice to Sarah, but it could also jeopardize the hospital's current cancer research programs. The truth would implicate powerful people, including some who still sat on the hospital board. Yet watching Emma sleep in the hallway each night, knowing her mother had sacrificed everything to protect children just like her, made the choice clear. He began copying files, knowing that once this information reached Robert Wilson, nothing would ever be the same. The truth about Sarah Miller's past was about to collide with the present in ways that would force everyone involved to confront their own roles in this tragedy. While adults around her uncovered dark truths and wrestled with moral dilemmas, Emma Miller faced her own daily battles in the hospital corridors. The resilience that had initially charmed the staff began showing cracks as her mother's condition deteriorated. Night nurses noticed she'd stopped singing to a teddy bear, instead clutching it in silent vigil outside her mother's room. The strain of their situation manifested in subtle ways. Emma developed a habit of hoarding food from her cafeteria meals, hiding crackers and fruit cups in various corners of the hospital. When kind-hearted staff members offered her treats, she would carefully wrap them in napkins, saving them for when Mummy gets better. The behavior spoke volumes about her underlying fears and understanding of their precarious situation. Her world had shrunk to the confines of the hospital's 7th floor. The playroom, though technically off-limits to non-patients, became her sanctuary during the day. The child life specialists, breaking protocol, allowed her to join their activities, watching as she methodically sorted medical toys, playing out scenes of healing and recovery over and over. During art therapy sessions, her drawings grew increasingly complex dark clouds hovering over hospital buildings, stick figures of doctors with angel wings. Sleep became an issue as Sarah's condition worsened. Emma fought against exhaustion each night, afraid her mother might need her. The security guards found her sleepwalking through the corridors, calling for Dr. Fuzzy to help make her mummy better. During the day, she would doze off in odd places under the nurse's station desk, in the corner of the chapel, beside the vending machines that hummed like her mother's breathing machines. The hospital staff noticed other concerning changes. Emma began mimicking medical procedures with her teddy bear, setting up elaborate treatments with stolen medical supplies, empty syringes, bandages, and surgical masks. She spoke less, but when she did, her vocabulary was peppered with medical terms no 3-year-old should know. Mummy needs more morphine, the cytology report was bad. Her relationship with other children in the hospital became complicated. While she showed extraordinary empathy for sick kids, comforting them during procedures and sharing her precious teddy bear, she struggled to relate to visiting siblings who got to go home at night. Once, when a young patient's family brought in birthday cake, Emma had a rare tantrum, screaming about the unfairness of celebrations. The social workers assigned to their case watched with growing concern as Emma developed attachment issues. She became increasingly clingy with certain staff members, particularly Jane Thompson, who reminded her of Sarah in her healthier days. When these favorite nurses ended their shifts, Emma would become inconsolable, adding another layer of guilt to the already emotionally strained staff. Robert Wilson observed these changes from a distance, recognizing in Emma's behavior echoes of Catherine's final months. He watched as she created elaborate stories about going home, about her mother getting better, about the future they would have together. Each fantasy was a dagger to those who knew Sarah's prognosis. The similarity to his own loss paralyzed him. He had the power to help but feared any intervention would only add to her eventual grief. The breaking point came during a routine fire drill. The alarm's sudden blare sent Emma into a panic attack, convinced something had happened to her mother. It took 3 staff members to calm her down, her small body shaking with sobs as she begged to see Sarah. The incident forced everyone to confront the reality that their makeshift arrangements were taking a psychological toll on the child. Dr. Anderson, watching Emma's deteriorating emotional state, faced an impossible choice. Hospital policy demanded action about her unauthorized residence, but removing her from her only remaining parent seemed unconscionably cruel. The social workers' suggestions of foster care or temporary housing met with fierce resistance from both Sarah and the hospital staff, who had become Emma's de facto family. As Emma's situation grew more dire, the hospital staff's protective instincts intensified. They created an unofficial schedule to ensure someone was always watching over her, sharing observations and concerns through quiet conversations during shift changes. Their efforts to shield her from the harsh realities of her situation while supporting her mounting emotional needs became an increasingly complex balance. What none of them could predict was how Emma's struggles would soon catalyze a chain of events that would force both the hospital administration and Robert Wilson to confront the human cost of their policies and decisions. The little girl who slept in the hallway was about to become the center of a storm that would change everything. Robert Wilson's first real interaction with Emma came unexpectedly one rainy Tuesday morning. He found her sitting cross-legged outside the hospital chapel, carefully arranging medical pamphlets into a makeshift dollhouse. Without looking up, she offered him a crumpled tissue to use as a blanket for his sick patient. Something in her matter-of-fact kindness broke through his carefully maintained professional distance. The unlikely friendship that developed between the billionaire developer and the homeless 3-year-old became the subject of whispered conversations among hospital staff. Every morning, Robert would arrive with a paper cup of hot chocolate extra marshmallows and sit with Emma while she made her rounds visiting patients she had befriended, offering comfort with a wisdom far beyond her years. Their conversations revealed depths that startled even the most seasoned child psychologists. Emma spoke of death with the straightforward acceptance unique to young children, asking Robert if heaven had good doctors and whether angels needed chemotherapy. Her questions about his own daughter came naturally, without the awkward hesitation adults showed around the topic of Catherine. "Did your little girl have a teddy bear too?" she asked one morning, holding up Dr. Fuzzy for inspection. Robert's throat tightened as he nodded, remembering Catherine's identical bear, now stored away in a box he couldn't bring himself to open. Emma considered this seriously before declaring, "Maybe they're playing together in heaven. Dr. Fuzzy says sick kids need lots of friends up there." Sarah watched these interactions from her hospital bed with a mixture of gratitude and trepidation. She recognized Robert Wilson from news coverage of the Hampton Street development, knew his company was responsible for their homelessness. Yet seeing Emma smile for the first time in weeks made it impossible to maintain her anger. The complexity of their situation, owing their current hardship to the man who now brought daily comfort to her daughter, weighed heavily on her weakening shoulders. The hospital staff observed another change in Emma. She began creating elaborate stories about her future, always including Mr. Robert in them. In her drawings, a tall figure in a suit appeared alongside the stick figure family she drew daily. When asked about these pictures, Emma would explain matter-of-factly that Mr. Robert was sad because his daughter was with the angels, so she was sharing her mummy with him. Robert found himself transformed by these morning visits. Board meetings were rescheduled around Emma's preferred storytelling time. His assistant noted he smiled more, though these smiles often held a sadness that hadn't been there before. He began taking a personal interest in the hospital's pediatric cases, quietly arranging for specialized treatments and equipment through anonymous donations. The relationship deepened when Emma caught a minor cold. Robert spent 3 nights sleeping in a chair outside her temporary room in the pediatric ward, memories of Catherine's final days haunting his attempts at rest. The sight of the powerful businessman reading Goodnight Moon while wearing a surgical mask became another piece of hospital folklore. Sarah's initial resistance to Robert's presence began to soften as she observed his genuine care for Emma. During her more lucid moments, she shared stories about her days as a doctor, about the children she'd treated, about her fears for Emma's future. Robert listened with an intensity that spoke of his own unresolved grief, recognizing in Sarah the same fierce devotion he'd seen in his late wife. The hospital administration watched this developing relationship with mixed emotions. Some saw it as a potential solution to their policy dilemma, while others worried about the ethical implications of allowing a wealthy donor such intimate access to a vulnerable family. Dr. Anderson, however, recognized something deeper occurring, a healing that went beyond medical charts and balance sheets. Emma's influence on Robert became evident in subtle ways. His notorious temper in business meetings mellowed. Development plans were quietly modified to include affordable housing components. The cutting remarks about inefficient public healthcare facilities disappeared from his public speeches. Those closest to him noticed he'd begun carrying a small, worn teddy bear in his briefcase, a gift from Emma to remember Catherine by. The most significant change came during a hospital board meeting discussing budget cuts to the pediatric ward. Robert, who usually remained silent during such discussions, suddenly spoke up. His voice shaking with unusual emotion, he shared Emma's story not as a policy problem to be solved, but as a human reality they all had a moral obligation to address. Yet beneath these growing bonds lay uncomfortable truths. Robert's legal team continued to warn him about the precedent his involvement might set. Sarah's condition continued to deteriorate, adding urgency to questions about Emma's future. The media began speculating about the billionaire's interest in the homeless child, forcing the hospital's PR team to run interference. What no one could fully appreciate was how this unlikely relationship was reshaping all their lives. Emma's simple acceptance of both joy and sorrow, her ability to give and receive love without reservation, offered a lesson in healing that no amount of wealth or medical knowledge could provide. As Robert navigated the complex emotions stirred by his growing attachment to Emma, he began to understand that some forms of poverty and wealth couldn't be measured in dollars. The morning Emma spontaneously hugged him. Calling him Uncle Robert for the first time, he found himself crying in his car, afterward the first tears he'd shed since Catherine's death. In helping Emma face her impending loss, Robert slowly began to process his own grief, finding in their shared pain a path toward healing neither had expected. As Robert Wilson's involvement with the Millers deepened, the situation at St. Mary's Medical Center became increasingly complex. The media circus intensified, with reporters camping outside the hospital, hoping to catch glimpses of the billionaire developer and the little girl who had apparently softened his heart. Local newspapers ran conflicting headlines: "Ruthless Developer's Redemption," alongside "Exploiting Tragedy, Wilson's Latest PR Stunt." The hospital board found itself divided. Half supported Robert's growing involvement, seeing it as a potential solution to both the Millers' situation and the hospital's financial struggles. The other half, led by board member James Harrison, argued that allowing special treatment for one family would undermine hospital policies and open them to liability. Behind closed doors, heated debates erupted about ethics, precedent, and the role of private wealth in public healthcare. Staff loyalties became strained. Those who had been caring for Emma faced increasing pressure to document and justify their actions. Incident reports were filed about broken protocols, unauthorized use of facilities, and resource allocation. Jane Thompson found herself defending her nurses' decisions to share meals, provide blankets, and allow Emma access to staff areas. The controversy spread to social media, where Wilson Redemption competed with Healthcare Justice. Activists used the situation to highlight systemic issues, pointing out that while Emma's story had a potential fairy tale ending, countless other families faced similar struggles without billionaire intervention. Robert's past business practices came under renewed scrutiny, with journalists digging into the histories of other families displaced by his developments. Sarah's former colleagues began speaking out, some defending her brilliant career, others suggesting her current situation was the result of her own stubborn righteousness. Old accusations about the misdiagnosis scandal resurfaced, along with whispers about pharmaceutical company influence and suppressed research data. The hospital's legal team worked overtime to contain potential liability issues. Robert faced his own challenges within Wilson Enterprises. Shareholders expressed concern about his changing priorities and emotional investment in the Miller case. Board members questioned the wisdom of halting several profitable development projects that would have displaced other low-income residents. His reputation for ruthless efficiency, once a point of pride, became a source of public criticism. The situation reached a boiling point when an anonymous source leaked details about Sarah's role in Catherine Wilson's case. The revelation that she had opposed the experimental treatment protocol, possibly predicting its fatal outcome, sent shockwaves through the medical community. Questions arose about why her warnings had been ignored and who had benefited from silencing her concerns. Local politicians seized on the controversy. Some called for investigations into hospital board practices and real estate development policies. Others defended the existing system, arguing that emotional responses to individual cases shouldn't drive policy changes. The mayor's office issued carefully worded statements about balancing progress with community needs. Emma, unaware of the storm surrounding her, continued her daily routine in the hospital corridors, but the tension began affecting her environment. Staff members were more hesitant in their interactions, conscious of being watched and judged. Security guards received instructions to more strictly enforce visitor policies, creating awkward situations with Emma's unofficial caretakers. Dr. Anderson found himself walking a tightrope between his medical duties and his growing understanding of the broader implications of the Miller case. His search through old records had revealed patterns of systematic suppression of whistleblowers like Sarah, but exposing these truths could potentially destroy careers and institutions. The hospital chaplain, Father Michael, observed that the situation had become a mirror, reflecting back to each person their own values and prejudices. Wealthy donors saw either redemption or manipulation in Robert's actions. Medical staff saw either hope or favoritism. The public saw either a heartwarming human interest story or a damning indictment of healthcare inequality. As pressure mounted, small cracks began appearing in the informal support system that had sustained Emma and Sarah. Staff members were reassigned, security protocols tightened, and access to certain areas restricted. The warmth and flexibility that had made their situation bearable began yielding to institutional rigidity. Robert watched these developments with growing concern. His attempt to help one family had unleashed forces beyond his control, threatening to destroy the very support system Emma needed most. The mounting tensions forced him to confront an uncomfortable truth: money alone couldn't solve the complex web of human needs and institutional failures that the Millers case represented. Meanwhile, Sarah's condition continued to deteriorate, adding urgency to questions about Emma's future. The media attention and hospital politics had created a pressure cooker environment, with everyone waiting for something to break. What no one realized was that the breaking point would come from an unexpected direction, forcing all involved to confront their roles in a system that had failed not just the Millers, but countless others like them. The story had become a battlefield for larger societal debates about healthcare access, wealth inequality, and corporate responsibility. Lost in the noise were two simple truths: a mother was dying, and a little girl slept in a hospital hallway, holding onto her teddy bear and hoping for miracles that money couldn't buy. As the controversy surrounding Emma and Robert escalated, Dr. Anderson's investigation uncovered layers of connections that no one had anticipated. Deep in the hospital archives, he found a photograph from a medical conference 15 years ago. In it, a young Sarah Miller stood next to Elizabeth Wilson, Robert's late wife, both wearing name tags identifying them as promising medical researchers. The implications were staggering. Further digging revealed that Sarah and Elizabeth had been research partners during their residency, working on innovative pediatric cancer treatments. Their early papers, published under their maiden names, had laid the groundwork for protocols that would later be corrupted by pharmaceutical companies. Elizabeth had gone on to marry Robert Wilson and leave medicine, while Sarah had continued their shared mission of finding gentler treatments for child patients. The connections grew more intricate. The experimental treatment that had failed Catherine Wilson had been a corrupted version of Sarah and Elizabeth's original research. Sarah's opposition to the protocol hadn't just been professional, it had been personal. She had recognized how far their original work had been twisted by corporate interests, but her attempts to intervene had been silenced. In Elizabeth's personal papers, preserved in the hospital's records, there were references to SM and her concerns about the treatment protocols. Elizabeth had been quietly supporting Sarah's attempts to reform the system from within, until her own daughter's illness consumed all her attention. The tragic irony was that both women had seen the flaws in the system, but neither had been able to prevent Catherine's death. The paperwork trail led to more revelations. The Hampton Street apartment complex, where Sarah and Emma had lived before being evicted, had been Elizabeth's first charitable project. She had established it as affordable housing for medical residents and patients' families, with Robert reluctantly supporting her vision. After her death, the property had been just another asset in Wilson Enterprises' portfolio, its significance forgotten, until it was slated for demolition. Dr. Anderson discovered letters between Elizabeth and Sarah, written during Catherine's treatment. Sarah had been secretly consulting on the case, providing Elizabeth with alternative treatment options that the hospital board had rejected. The last letter, dated just days before Catherine's death, contained Sarah's desperate plea to stop the experimental protocol, a warning that went unheeded. The most shocking discovery came in the form of a sealed envelope in Elizabeth's personal effects, addressed to Robert but never delivered. Inside was evidence that the pharmaceutical company behind Catherine's experimental treatment had knowingly suppressed data about its risks. Sarah had helped Elizabeth compile this information, but Elizabeth's death had prevented its exposure. Robert's own investigation through private channels confirmed these connections. His wife and Sarah had been more than colleagues, they had been friends united in their fight against a system that prioritized profits over patients. The realization that he had unknowingly contributed to the destruction of his wife's legacy by displacing Sarah hit him with devastating force. The intertwining of their lives extended beyond professional connections. Elizabeth's diary revealed that she had asked Sarah to be Catherine's godmother, a plan interrupted by the aggressive progression of Catherine's illness. Sarah had never mentioned this connection, even as she fought to save Catherine's life and later, as she lost everything to the company Elizabeth's husband controlled. As these hidden threads came to light, the relationship between Emma and Robert took on new significance. Emma's intuitive connection to Robert, her understanding of his grief, seemed less coincidental. She was, in many ways, the embodiment of Elizabeth and Sarah's shared vision, a child who needed the kind of compassionate care they had fought to provide. The hospital staff who learned of these connections watched Robert and Emma's interactions with new understanding. His morning visits with hot chocolate, his patience with her medical play, his fierce protection of her interests all echoed Elizabeth's approach to patient care. Without knowing it, Robert had begun fulfilling his late wife's mission through his care for Emma. These revelations added layers of complexity to an already complicated situation. The story was no longer just about a homeless child and a guilty billionaire. It was about legacy, friendship, and the price of silence in the face of systemic corruption. The interweaving of past and present created a tapestry of responsibility and redemption that would forever change how everyone involved viewed their roles in this unfolding drama. The question now wasn't just about Emma's future or Sarah's care. It was about how to honor the connection between two women who had tried to change a broken system, and how to ensure their shared vision wasn't lost again. As Robert absorbed these discoveries, he began to understand that his involvement with Emma and Sarah wasn't just about redemption, it was about completing a circle that had been drawn years before he ever knew it existed. Copyright? Sarah Miller's condition took a dramatic turn on a quiet Sunday morning. The cancer, aggressive and unrelenting, had spread faster than even her medical training had prepared her for. Dr. Anderson found her struggling to breathe, her once sharp mind clouded by pain and medication. Emma, sensing the change in her mother, refused to leave the room, her small hands clutched tightly around Dr. Fuzzy as she watched the medical team work. The hospital room transformed into a battlefield as doctors fought to stabilize her condition. Machines beeped urgently, nurses moved with practiced efficiency, and through it all, Emma sat in the corner, unusually still and silent. Robert Wilson, arriving for his usual morning visit with hot chocolate, found himself frozen in the doorway, memories of Catherine's final days overwhelming him. Dr. Anderson's face told the story before his words could. The cancer had invaded Sarah's lungs, making each breath a struggle. The experimental treatments they'd hoped to try were now impossible, her body was too weak to withstand them. The cruel irony wasn't lost on anyone. The very treatments she had once fought to reform were now beyond her reach when she needed them most. Emma displayed an understanding that broke the hearts of everyone present. She carefully arranged her stuffed animals around her mother's bed, explaining to each one that they needed to be very quiet because Mummy's angels were visiting. When Sarah's breathing became particularly labored, Emma would climb onto the bed and sing softly, the same lullabies her mother had once sung to her. The hospital staff witnessed moments that would haunt them for years. Sarah, in her more lucid moments, tried to prepare Emma for what was coming. She would point to the stars visible from her window, telling Emma that soon she would be watching over her from up there. Emma would nod solemnly, then ask practical questions that no 3-year-old should have to consider. Who will read my bedtime stories? Will the angels let you come visit? Robert found himself taking on an increasingly active role. He sat through medical consultations, his business acumen now focused on understanding treatment options and pain management protocols. During one particularly difficult night, he overheard Emma telling Dr. Ozzy that maybe Mr. Robert could be her Earth daddy, while her mummy became her sky mummy. The words hit him with physical force. Sarah's lucid moments became precious windows for necessary discussions. She worried about Emma's future, about the system that had failed them, about the truths that needed to be told. In private conversations with Robert, she shared the full story of his wife Elizabeth's involvement in their research, of Catherine's treatment, of the warnings that went unheeded. Each revelation seemed to forge a stronger bond between them, built on shared grief and responsibility. The hospital board, faced with the reality of Sarah's condition, finally dropped their objections to Emma's presence. Some members, witnessing the situation firsthand, began questioning the policies they had so rigidly enforced. The human cost of their decisions, personified in this small family's tragedy, became impossible to ignore. As Sarah's strength ebbed, she focused on creating memories for Emma. She recorded videos on a phone Robert had provided, reading stories, sharing memories, and offering the kind of advice only a mother could give. The nurses helped her make handprints and collect locks of hair, precious artifacts of their time together. She wrote letters for Emma's future milestones: first day of school, 16th birthday, wedding day, each sealed with tears and hope. The most difficult moments came when Sarah's professional knowledge collided with her maternal instincts. She could read her own charts, understand every declining number, recognize each sign of approaching death. Yet she fought with everything she had, determined to give Emma as much time as possible. Her colleagues' faces, when they thought she wasn't watching, told her everything she already knew. Through it all, Emma showed a strength that amazed and devastated those around her. She developed an almost uncanny sense of when her mother needed her, appearing at Sarah's bedside moments before a crisis. She learned to alert nurses when her mother's breathing changed, to offer ice chips without being asked, to curl up beside her mother without disturbing the various tubes and monitors. Robert watched this dance between mother and daughter with a growing understanding of what Elizabeth had tried to tell him about Sarah years ago. Here was the same fierce dedication to healing, the same unwavering commitment to truth, the same gentle strength that had characterized their research partnership. In Emma, he saw echoes of both women, the stubborn hope of his wife and the quiet resilience of her friend. As Sarah's condition deteriorated, the hospital corridors that had once been Emma's playground became quieter, more solemn. The staff who had watched over her now found themselves watching a child face the unthinkable with grace beyond her years. Each person who witnessed their story found themselves changed by it, forced to confront questions about justice, healthcare, and the true meaning of wealth. The truth emerged during one of Sarah's most lucid moments, as the sunset painted her hospital room in shades of gold. Her voice, barely a whisper, called Robert to her bedside. "There's something about Elizabeth you need to know," she began, her words carrying the weight of years of silence. Sarah revealed that she and Elizabeth hadn't just been research partners, they had been sisters, separated by adoption at birth. They had discovered their connection during medical school, choosing to keep it private to protect their professional reputations. Their shared passion for pediatric medicine wasn't coincidental, it was literally in their blood. The revelation sent shockwaves through Robert's understanding of the past decade. Elizabeth's inexplicable devotion to Sarah's research, her insistence on funding the Hampton Street housing project, her fierce defense of Sarah during the initial whistle-blowing controversy all took on new meaning. The photograph he'd found of them at the medical conference showed more than colleagues. It captured two sisters who had found each other against impossible odds. The deeper truth about Catherine's treatment emerged next. Sarah and Elizabeth had developed their protocol specifically to help children like Catherine, knowing their shared family history of aggressive cancers. When pharmaceutical companies had modified their research for profit, both sisters had fought against it. Elizabeth's support of Sarah's opposition hadn't just been professional, it had been a desperate attempt to protect her own daughter. Emma, playing quietly in the corner, was more than just Sarah's daughter, she was Elizabeth's niece, Catherine's cousin. The connection explained the instant bond between Robert and Emma, the familiar mannerisms that had haunted him, the way she seemed to understand his grief. She wasn't just any child who needed help, she was family. The implications of these connections hit Robert with staggering force. His company's displacement of Sarah and Emma hadn't just been another business decision, it had been an unconscious betrayal of Elizabeth's legacy. The affordable housing complex he'd demolished had been his late wife's attempt to protect her sister and niece, a protection he had unknowingly stripped away. Dr. Anderson, present for these revelations, provided medical confirmation. Genetic tests from Catherine's treatment showed markers that made sense only in light of this family connection. The experimental protocol that had failed Catherine might have been avoided if Sarah's warnings, backed by intimate knowledge of their family medical history, had been heeded. Sarah explained how she had discovered Emma's relationship to Catherine during her own pregnancy. She had kept the secret, watching from afar as her niece fought the same disease that would later claim her own life. The guilt of being unable to save Catherine, combined with the professional persecution she faced, had led her to maintain her silence even after losing everything. The hospital staff who witnessed this revelation saw the pieces fall into place. Emma's intuitive understanding of Robert's grief, her natural place in his life, the way she had helped him process Catherine's loss, it hadn't been just coincidence or the natural empathy of a child. It had been the invisible pull of family bonds, transcending even death and separation. Robert struggled to process how many chances at family he had unknowingly lost. His wife's sister had been right there, fighting to save his daughter. His niece had been sleeping in hospital hallways while he lived in a penthouse filled with empty rooms. The weight of missed opportunities and unintentional betrayals threatened to overwhelm him. The truth brought both healing and fresh pain. It offered explanation for the inexplicable connections that had drawn them together, but also highlighted the tragic waste of years lost to silence and separation. The knowledge that Catherine and Emma could have grown up as cousins, that Elizabeth and Sarah could have faced their battles together, added new layers to their shared grief. As the sun set on this day of revelations, Emma climbed onto Robert's lap, instinctively offering comfort in the way that had always seemed so natural to her. Sarah watched them from her hospital bed, seeing in their interaction echoes of Elizabeth's gentle strength. The truth had finally emerged, but its power to heal or hurt still hung in the balance, waiting to be decided by what they would choose to do with it. These revelations would reshape not just their personal relationships, but the very foundation of Robert's understanding of family, responsibility, and redemption. The question now wasn't just about saving Emma from homelessness or honoring Sarah's sacrifice, it was about preserving a family legacy that had been hidden for too long. The revelation of family ties threw the hospital into unprecedented territory. The board called an emergency meeting, struggling to navigate the legal and ethical implications of Sarah's disclosure. Robert Wilson's relationship to Emma wasn't just a wealthy benefactor's interest anymore, it was a blood claim that complicated every policy decision they'd made. Sarah's deteriorating condition forced immediate action. Robert, now understanding his connection as Emma's uncle, filed emergency guardianship papers. The hospital's legal team worked through the night, expediting documentation that typically took months. Every hour mattered as Sarah's condition worsened, the need to secure Emma's future becoming increasingly urgent. The media attention intensified as fragments of the story leaked. Headlines screamed about hidden family ties and corporate cover-ups. Protesters gathered outside Wilson Enterprises, some supporting Robert's claim to Emma, others accusing him of using family connections to whitewash his company's role in the family's homelessness. The personal tragedy had become a public spectacle. Dr. Anderson faced his own crisis of conscience. The genetic information supporting Sarah's story also revealed that the hospital had ignored crucial medical history when treating Catherine. This knowledge could destroy careers and institutions, but its suppression had already cost lives. His decision to release the full medical records sent shockwaves through the medical community. The hospital board split into factions. One group, led by those who had opposed the experimental treatments years ago, pushed for full disclosure and systematic reform. Others, fearful of liability and scandal, argued for discreet settlements and minimal publicity. The debate raged while Sarah slipped away and Emma's future hung in the balance. Robert found himself fighting battles on multiple fronts. His company's board demanded his resignation, claiming his emotional involvement compromised his business judgment. Shareholders threatened lawsuits over his decision to halt similar development projects. Yet for the first time in his career, profit margins seemed trivial compared to the weight of family responsibility. Emma, sensitive to the mounting tensions, began showing signs of stress. Her normally sunny disposition darkened. She refused to leave Sarah's room, became wary of strangers, and clutched Dr. Fuzzy with increasing desperation. The child psychologist warned that the public battle over her future was adding trauma to her impending loss. The situation reached a critical point when Sarah's doctors confirmed she had days, perhaps hours, left. Robert faced an impossible decision: continue fighting the public battles for justice and reform, or focus entirely on helping Emma through her mother's final moments. The choice would define not just Emma's future, but the legacy of both Sarah and Elizabeth's work. Legal teams descended on the hospital, representing every interested party. Child Services questioned the appropriateness of Robert's guardianship, given his company's role in the family's homelessness. Hospital administrators worried about liability. Pharmaceutical companies sent representatives to manage the potential fallout from the revealed research data. Sarah, drifting in and out of consciousness, used her limited strength to make her wishes clear. She signed legal documents naming Robert as Emma's guardian, recorded video testimony about the medical research controversy, and wrote a final letter explaining her silence about their family connection. Each action seemed to drain more of her remaining energy. The hospital staff, caught between institutional pressures and personal loyalties, continued their unofficial support network around Emma. They created shifts to ensure familiar faces were always present, maintained her daily routines, and shielded her from the chaos swirling around her family's story. Robert made the decision that would define this crucial moment. In a press conference that stunned both allies and opponents, he announced his resignation as CEO of Wilson Enterprises. He pledged his personal fortune to establishing a foundation in Elizabeth and Sarah's names, dedicated to reforming pediatric cancer research and providing housing for families facing medical crises. The announcement silenced the hospital corridors. Staff members gathered around TVs and phones, watching as Robert publicly acknowledged his failures and committed to honoring both sisters' legacies. His voice broke as he spoke about Elizabeth's vision for the Hampton Street housing project, Sarah's fight for ethical medical research, and his own blindness to the human cost of corporate expansion. As Robert's words echoed through the hospital speakers, Emma sat by Sarah's bedside, holding her mother's hand and singing softly. The simple scene cut through the complexity of legal battles and public controversies, reminding everyone involved of what truly mattered: a little girl about to lose her mother, and a family trying to heal generations of separation and loss. In this moment of crisis, the intersection of personal tragedy and public accountability forced everyone involved to make decisions that would ripple through lives far beyond the hospital walls. The choices made in these critical hours would determine not just Emma's future, but the future of countless families facing similar battles against an often inhuman system. The last week of Sarah Miller's life unfolded in a series of precious, painful moments. The hospital room, once clinical and stark, had been transformed by Emma's artwork and the countless cards from staff members. Sarah, though increasingly confined to her bed, maintained a quiet dignity that moved even the most seasoned healthcare workers. Each day followed a ritual that Emma had carefully established. Mornings began with her climbing into her mother's bed, sharing whispered conversations that no one else was privileged to hear. She would arrange and rearrange Dr. Fuzzy and her other stuffed animals, ensuring her mother had the best view of their silent, plush guardians. Robert would arrive with hot chocolate, now bringing 3 cups, one for Emma, one for Sarah on her rare lucid moments, and one for himself. Sarah used her remaining strength to record messages for Emma's future. Her physician's training told her exactly how little time she had left, making each word precious. She spoke of birthdays she wouldn't see, graduations she wouldn't attend, a wedding she couldn't help plan. The recordings, painful for the staff to witness, were filled not with sadness but with love and hope for the daughter she was leaving behind. Robert sat with her during the nights when pain kept her awake. They spoke of Elizabeth, sharing memories that brought their shared loss into sharper focus. Sarah revealed small details about their discovered sisterhood, how they had laughed at sharing the same allergies, how they had finished each other's sentences during research presentations. These conversations helped Robert understand Elizabeth in a new way, seeing her through the eyes of the sister who had known her secrets. Emma showed an uncanny ability to sense when her mother needed her most. She would appear at Sarah's bedside moments before a crisis, her small hand finding her mother's with unerring accuracy. The nurses watched in wonder as the child seemed to know exactly when to be still and quiet, and when to share one of her stories about Dr. Fuzzy's adventures. The hospital staff moved around them with gentle efficiency, each finding ways to make these final days easier. The night shift brought extra blankets without being asked. The cafeteria workers prepared Sarah's favorite foods, even when she could no longer eat them. The cleaning staff worked silently, careful not to disturb the precious moments between mother and daughter. Sarah's most difficult task was preparing Emma for what was coming. She spoke of becoming a sky mummy watching over Emma from the stars. These conversations, heartbreaking for adults to overhear, were handled with remarkable grace by both mother and daughter. Emma would ask practical questions. Can sky mummies still give hugs that left the nurses fighting back tears? Robert witnessed these exchanges with a growing understanding of his responsibility. He saw in Emma's careful attention to her mother echoes of Catherine's final days, the same brave face, the same desire to protect the adults around her from her own fear and grief. His presence became a constant, reliable force in the room, offering silent support to both mother and daughter. The medical team, led by Dr. Anderson, struggled with their own emotions as they watched their former colleague face death with the same dignity she had shown throughout her career. They had to balance their professional duties with their personal connections to a woman who had once walked these halls as one of their own. In her final coherent moments, Sarah asked to speak with Robert alone. She entrusted him with letters she had written for Emma's future milestones, for the hospital board, for the family she had tried to help through her research. Her last request was simple but powerful: tell our story, make it matter. The night before Sarah slipped into her final sleep, Emma crawled into bed beside her mother. The small girl arranged Dr. Fuzzy carefully between them, explaining to the nurses that he was keeping Mummy's dreams safe. Robert sat in the chair by the bed, watching this last vigil through tears he no longer tried to hide. The room filled with a peace that transcended the usual hospital chaos. Staff members found excuses to pass by, each carrying away the image of mother and daughter entwined in sleep, while the uncle who had once been a stranger kept watch. It was a tableau of family in its purest form, not bound by corporate success or social status, but by love and shared pain. Sarah's final gift to her daughter was a peaceful passing. She slipped away in the early morning hours, with Emma curled against her side and Robert holding her hand. Her last conscious act had been to smile at her daughter's sleeping face, a mother's love transcending even death's approach. The morning after Sarah's passing dawned with a silence that seemed to echo through the hospital corridors. Emma, who had been gently moved to Robert's arms during the night, woke with the immediate awareness that only small children possess. Her first words, "Mummy's with the angels now, isn't she?" broke the hearts of everyone present. The following days revealed the depth of Emma's understanding and the complexity of her grief. She continued her daily routines with painful precision, making her rounds to visit patients, but now sharing stories about her sky mummy watching over them. The staff noticed she would stop outside her mother's empty room, speaking softly to Dr. Fuzzy about memories only they shared. Robert struggled to balance his desire to shield Emma from pain with the psychologist's advice to let her grieve naturally. She began sleeping in his penthouse apartment, but each night would ask to return to the hospital, explaining with heartbreaking logic that her mother might not be able to find her in a new place. These nightly visits to the hospital became their ritual, a bridge between past and future. Emma's grief manifested in unexpected ways. She began collecting things that reminded her of Sarah: empty medicine cups, spare hospital blankets, even the visitor passes she had worn. Each item was carefully stored in a shoebox she called her mummy memories. The child psychologist explained that this hoarding behavior was her way of trying to hold onto her mother's presence. The hospital staff, themselves mourning Sarah, watched helplessly as Emma processed her loss. She would sometimes sit at the nurse's station, carefully writing prescriptions for sad patients, drawings of sunshine and flowers that she insisted had been her mother's special medicine. These moments of play therapy revealed both her deep understanding of her mother's role and her need to maintain that connection. Nightmares became frequent visitors. Emma would wake crying for her mother, confused by the unfamiliar surroundings of Robert's home. During these episodes, she would clutch Dr. Fuzzy and recite the stories Sarah had told her about becoming a sky mummy, as if reassuring herself of their truth. Robert learned to sit with her during these moments, neither trying to fix her pain nor minimize it. The most challenging moments came when Emma encountered reminders of her mother's medical career. Seeing doctors in white coats would trigger both excitement and profound sadness. She would run to them, then stop suddenly, remembering her mother would never wear one again. These incidents left both Emma and the medical staff emotional, struggling to navigate the complex intersection of professional duty and personal loss. Robert observed how Emma's grief mirrored his own experience with Catherine's death. He recognized the same patterns: the desperate attempt to maintain routines, the collection of meaningful objects, the struggle to understand the permanence of loss. This understanding helped him provide the support she needed, even as he processed his own complex emotions about gaining and losing family in such rapid succession. The child psychologist worked closely with them, helping Emma express her feelings through play and art. Her drawings became increasingly complex pictures of her mother among the stars, watching over her and Robert. She would explain these drawings in detail, creating elaborate stories about her mother's new role as a doctor for angels, helping other sky mummies take care of their children. Perhaps the most poignant aspect of Emma's grieving process was her concern for others. She would comfort crying patients with a wisdom beyond her years, sharing her own story of loss and hope. The staff watched in amazement as this 3-year-old offered solace to adults, explaining with perfect conviction that their loved ones could see them from the stars, just like her mummy. Robert found himself learning from Emma's honest approach to grief. Where adults often tried to hide their pain, she expressed hers openly, allowing others to share in both her sadness and her healing. Her ability to find joy in memories while acknowledging the pain of loss taught him new ways to process his own grief for Catherine and Elizabeth. Support came from unexpected places. Patients and their families, touched by Emma's story, reached out with comfort and understanding. Letters arrived from people Sarah had helped during her medical career, sharing stories that helped Emma understand her mother's legacy. The hospital community rallied around them, creating a network of care that honored Sarah's memory while supporting her daughter's future. Through it all, Emma maintained her mother's final lesson that love transcends physical presence. She would tell anyone who would listen that she had the best mummy in the world, one who loved her so much she became a star to watch over her forever. Her childish faith in this truth carried her through the darkest moments of loss, offering hope to others struggling with their own grief. In the days following Sarah's death, Robert Wilson found himself haunted by the cascade of events his business decisions had set in motion. Every night, after tucking Emma into bed, he would sit in his study, surrounded by documents that traced his company's role in the Millers' tragedy. The Hampton Street development plans, Sarah's eviction notice, and Elizabeth's original proposals for the affordable housing project lay spread before him like evidence at a trial where he served as both judge and accused. The weight of his guilt manifested in sleepless nights and quiet vigils. He would stand at his penthouse window, looking down at the city he had helped build, seeing for the first time the human cost of each gleaming tower. The memory of Sarah's final days, coupled with the knowledge that his actions had contributed to her hardships, drove him to begin dismantling the very empire he had spent decades building. His transformation became evident in small but significant ways. Board meetings were relocated to the pediatric ward so he could remain close to Emma. Development plans were scrutinized not just for profit margins but for their impact on vulnerable families. The ruthless businessman who had once dismissed community concerns as sentimental obstacles found himself advocating for those he had previously ignored. The discovery of Elizabeth's connection to Sarah added layers of complexity to his guilt. Each new detail revealed through Dr. Anderson's investigation showed how thoroughly he had failed both his late wife and her sister. His company had destroyed the very protections Elizabeth had tried to create for Sarah and Emma. The irony of his wealth being built partly on the destruction of his own family's legacy tormented him. Robert's redemption began with concrete actions. He established the Elizabeth and Sarah Miller Foundation, dedicated to providing housing and medical support for families facing serious illnesses. The Hampton Street property was reclaimed and reconstructed as a residential medical facility, offering free accommodation to patients' families. Each project felt like a small step toward atoning for past sins. His relationship with Emma became both his greatest joy and his most poignant reminder of what had been lost. In her face, he saw echoes of Catherine, Elizabeth, and Sarah, 3 generations of women he had failed in different ways. Yet her unconditional acceptance of him, her ability to love despite loss, showed him a path toward forgiveness he hadn't known existed. The business world watched in amazement as Robert Wilson, once known for his aggressive acquisition strategies, became an advocate for corporate responsibility. He used his influence to push for policy changes, requiring social impact assessments for all major developments. His personal fortune, once a symbol of success, became a tool for implementing the changes Sarah and Elizabeth had envisioned. The hospital staff, who had initially viewed him with suspicion, witnessed his transformation firsthand. They saw how he would sit for hours in the pediatric ward, listening to family stories, understanding their struggles in a way his former self never would have bothered to learn. His presence, once intimidating, became a source of hope for families facing similar challenges. Dr. Anderson shared more of Sarah's research, revealing how her work with Elizabeth could have revolutionized pediatric cancer treatment if given proper support. But this knowledge spurred Robert to establish research grants in their names, ensuring that future medical breakthroughs wouldn't be compromised by corporate interests as theirs had been. The media narrative around Robert shifted from ruthless developer to reformed philanthropist, but such labels meant little to him now. His focus remained on Emma and on honoring the legacies of the 3 women whose lives had been intertwined with his own. Each decision he made was guided by a simple question: what would Elizabeth and Sarah have wanted? His most significant act of redemption came in the form of a public confession. At a hospital board meeting, Robert detailed his company's role in displacing vulnerable families, including Sarah and Emma. He acknowledged how corporate policies had prioritized profit over human dignity and committed to making amends not just through charity but through systematic change. The ghost of his past decisions still haunted him, but Emma's presence offered daily lessons in resilience and forgiveness. Her ability to hold both love and loss, to remember Sarah with joy while embracing her new life with him, showed Robert that redemption wasn't about erasing past mistakes, but about learning from them to create a better future. As Emma's legal guardian and loving uncle, Robert found himself learning to balance the guilt of his past with the responsibilities of his present. Each day brought new challenges and opportunities for redemption as he worked to create the kind of world Sarah and Elizabeth had envisioned, one where profit never came at the expense of humanity. 1 month after Sarah's passing, while helping Emma sort through her mother's belongings, Robert discovered a worn leather journal hidden in a box of medical textbooks. The diary, spanning the last 5 years, revealed Sarah's innermost thoughts, fears, and a truth that would reshape their understanding of their shared history. The early entries detailed Sarah's joy at discovering her connection to Elizabeth during medical school. Their shared passion for pediatric medicine had drawn them together before they knew they were sisters. Sarah described their late-night study sessions that turned into deep discussions about their adoptive families, their dreams for changing healthcare, and their shared determination to make medicine more humane. More devastating were the entries about Catherine's illness. Sarah's anguish at watching her niece suffer through experimental treatments she had opposed was palpable in every word. She described sleepless nights spent reviewing research data, desperate attempts to convince the hospital board to consider alternative therapies, and the heartbreaking moment when Elizabeth confided her own doubts about the treatment protocol. The most revealing entries concerned Emma. Sarah had discovered her pregnancy shortly after Catherine's death, and her joy was tempered by grief for her lost niece. She wrote of her decision to name her daughter Emma Elizabeth, honoring the sister who had become her closest friend and confidante. The pages contained hopes for Emma's future, fears about her own mortality, and a mother's desperate wish for her daughter to know she was part of a larger family story. Robert found himself particularly moved by Sarah's descriptions of life after losing her medical license. She wrote of watching Emma play doctor with her stuffed animals, using the same gentle mannerisms she had learned from observing her mother with patients. There were entries about passing the hospital where she had once worked, explaining to Emma why Mummy couldn't wear her white coat anymore, and the pride and pain of seeing her daughter's natural empathy for others. The final entries, written in an increasingly unsteady hand, focused on Emma's future. Sarah expressed her hope that Robert would discover their connection, her faith that he would understand the responsibility of family once he knew the truth. She included letters meant for Emma's major life events, each filled with the wisdom and love of a mother trying to reach across time to guide her child. Most surprising was a sealed envelope addressed to Robert, containing evidence that cleared Sarah's name in the misdiagnosis scandal. Elizabeth had been gathering this information before her death, planning to help restore her sister's reputation. Sarah had kept the evidence private, choosing her daughter's well-being over her own vindication. The diary's discovery sent ripples through the hospital administration. Dr. Anderson used the new evidence to launch a formal review of Sarah's case, leading to the posthumous restoration of her medical license. The truth about the pharmaceutical company's manipulation of trial data, detailed in Sarah's careful notes, sparked investigations that would eventually change hospital research protocols. For Emma, the diary became a precious link to her mother. Robert would read her age-appropriate entries each night, helping her understand the depth of her mother's love and the strength of her character. The stories of Sarah and Elizabeth's friendship, their shared dreams and determination, became bedtime stories that connected Emma to both her mother and her aunt. Through Sarah's words, Robert gained a deeper understanding of the woman who had been his wife's sister and his niece's mother. The diary revealed not just their family connection, but the shared values and vision that had bound the sisters together. Her final entries, full of hope for Emma's future despite her own approaching death, became a guide for Robert in his new role as Emma's guardian. The diary stood as testament to Sarah's legacy not just as a doctor or mother, but as someone who understood that true family transcended biological connections and social status. Her words would continue to influence lives long after her passing, ensuring that her story and the truths she fought to protect would not be forgotten. The revelation of Sarah's diary and the true extent of the family connections ignited a media firestorm that transformed a local tragedy into a national conversation about healthcare, corporate responsibility, and family bonds. Major news networks descended on St. Mary's Hospital, their cameras capturing the striking image of Robert Wilson, the once feared developer, reading his sister-in-law's diary entries to his niece in the hospital garden. Social media erupted with the hashtag Sarah's story, as excerpts from her diary went viral. Her accounts of fighting against corrupt pharmaceutical practices, losing everything to protect patient safety, and maintaining her dignity while homeless struck a chord with millions. Healthcare workers shared their own stories of witnessing similar injustices, creating a movement that demanded systemic change. The hospital board faced intense public scrutiny. The evidence in Sarah's diary, combined with Elizabeth's suppressed research, exposed years of questionable practices in clinical trials. Several board members resigned in disgrace, while others joined Robert in pushing for comprehensive reforms in patient care and medical research protocols. Former patients of Dr. Sarah Miller came forward with stories of her compassion and dedication. Parents whose children she had treated spoke of her refusing to accept payment from struggling families, of staying long after her shifts to comfort frightened patients, of fighting insurance companies to approve necessary treatments. These testimonials transformed her from a cautionary tale into a symbol of medical ethics and human dignity. Professional medical associations began reviewing similar cases nationwide. Sarah's detailed documentation of how pharmaceutical companies manipulated trial data led to investigations at several major hospitals. The practice of silencing whistleblowers through professional retaliation became a focal point of healthcare reform discussions. Robert's public acknowledgement of his role in the tragedy, coupled with his commitment to change, sparked debates in corporate boardrooms across the country. Other CEOs faced pressure to examine their own development practices and their impact on vulnerable communities. The Wilson Enterprises model of combining profit with social responsibility became a case study in business schools. Local community response was particularly powerful. The Hampton Street neighborhood, where Sarah and Emma had lived, organized memorials and support rallies. Former residents shared stories of Sarah providing free medical care from her apartment, of her helping elderly neighbors with prescriptions, of her quiet dignity in the face of eviction. These personal accounts humanized the statistics of development-driven displacement. The media attention brought unexpected healing. Emma, initially overwhelmed by the public interest, found comfort in hearing stories about her mother's impact on others. She began collecting newspaper clippings and video segments, creating a new kind of memory box that helped her understand her mother's legacy. Healthcare advocacy groups used Sarah's story to push for legislative changes. Bills were introduced to protect medical whistleblowers, ensure affordable housing near major hospitals, and strengthen oversight of clinical trials. The Elizabeth and Sarah Miller Act, championed by Robert's Foundation, proposed comprehensive reforms in pediatric cancer research. Perhaps most significantly, the public response created a support network for families facing similar challenges. The Wilson Miller Foundation received thousands of applications from families struggling with medical bills and housing insecurity. Robert's initiative to convert development properties into patient-family housing inspired similar programs nationwide. The story's impact rippled through multiple sectors: healthcare, real estate development, corporate responsibility, and family services. What began as a personal tragedy evolved into a catalyst for change, proving that one person's stand for truth could, even posthumously, transform systems that had seemed immutable. As the media attention gradually subsided, the lasting effects of Sarah's story continued to influence policy and practice. Her diary, now part of the hospital's ethics training program, ensured that future generations of medical professionals would understand the true cost and value of maintaining their principles in the face of systemic pressure. In the quiet moments between public revelations and institutional changes, the true healing happened in private as Robert and Emma forged their new family bonds. Their evening routine became sacred dinner together in the penthouse apartment, followed by readings from Sarah's diary and conversations about the stars where both their mothers now watched over them. Emma's natural resilience helped bridge the awkward early days of their new arrangement. She approached living with Uncle Robert with the same straightforward acceptance she had shown throughout her ordeals. Her questions were disarmingly direct. Did Mummy and Aunt Elizabeth play together in heaven? Do you think Catherine likes having two mummies up there? Her innocent perspective helped Robert process his own complex emotions about their entwined family history. The physical transformation of their living space reflected their growing connection. Robert's stark, modernist penthouse gradually filled with Emma's artwork, stuffed animals, and the comfortable chaos of childhood. He found himself learning to navigate tea parties with Dr. Fuzzy, mastered the art of bedtime stories, and appreciate the joy of weekend pancake breakfasts. The change in his home mirrored the change in his heart. Their shared grief became a foundation for understanding each other. Emma's ability to speak openly about loss helped Robert finally confront his feelings about Catherine and Elizabeth. Together, they created new traditions that honored all three women birthday celebrations for Catherine that included Emma's homemade cards, quiet visits to Elizabeth's garden where they would read Sarah's diary entries, and weekly trips to the hospital to visit the staff who had become extended family. The discovery that Emma had inherited both her mother's and aunt's gift for healing became apparent in unexpected ways. She showed an intuitive understanding of others' pain, often knowing exactly when Robert needed a hug or when a passing stranger could use a smile. Her playroom became a mix of medical toys and art supplies as she processed her experiences through both creative expression and nurturing play. Hospital staff who had known both Sarah and Elizabeth remarked on how Emma combined Sarah's gentle strength with Elizabeth's determined optimism. Robert found himself sharing stories about Elizabeth more freely, helping Emma understand the aunt she had never met, but whose legacy she carried. These conversations helped him see Elizabeth in a new light, understanding her not just as his wife but as part of a larger family story. The legal process of adoption became a celebration rather than a formality. Emma approached it with characteristic directness, asking thoughtful questions about what it meant to have both a sky family and an earth family. Robert ensured that the proceedings honored Sarah's memory while affirming their new bond. The day the adoption was finalized, Emma presented Robert with a crayon drawing of their unique family tree, complete with stars for those watching from above. Their home became a place where memories were freely shared and grief could coexist with joy. Photos of Catherine, Elizabeth, and Sarah were displayed prominently, creating visual anchors for family stories. Emma would often stand before them, explaining to visitors how she had the most special family because it included both angels and humans. The foundation they established in Sarah and Elizabeth's names became a family project. Emma joined Robert on visits to families receiving assistance, her natural empathy helping bridge the gap between corporate philanthropy and human connection. She understood instinctively that helping others honored her mother's memory. Through all these changes, Dr. Fuzzy remained a constant presence, serving as both a link to Sarah and a symbol of their new family's resilience. The well-loved bear sat in on business meetings, medical consultations, and bedtime stories, a silent witness to their growing bond. Robert came to see the stuffed animal as Emma did not just as a toy, but as a guardian of family memories and a bridge between past and future. 1 year after Sarah's passing, St. Mary's Medical Center underwent a transformation that went far beyond its physical renovation. The Elizabeth and Sarah Miller Pediatric Wing, funded by the Wilson Foundation, stood as a testament to how tragedy could spark meaningful change. The new facility incorporated elements of both sisters' vision, cutting-edge medical technology alongside homey comfort for patients and their families. The most significant change was the implementation of the Miller Protocol for pediatric care. Based on Sarah's diary notes and Elizabeth's research, the protocol emphasized holistic treatment approaches that considered not just the patient's medical needs, but their emotional and family support requirements as well. Every room was designed to accommodate family members comfortably, ensuring no child would face treatment alone. Emma's influence was visible throughout the new wing. The playroom, officially named Emma's Corner, was filled with medical-themed toys and art supplies, allowing young patients to process their experiences through play, just as Emma had done. The walls featured her artwork alongside photographs of Sarah and Elizabeth, reminding staff and visitors of the human story behind the institutional changes. The hospital's policies underwent radical revision. A new patient advocacy department, staffed by former whistleblowers and patient rights activists, ensured that medical ethics weren't compromised by financial considerations. The board of directors now included community representatives and former patients, bringing diverse perspectives to administrative decisions. Robert's corporate expertise, now focused on healthcare accessibility, helped create innovative funding solutions. A sliding-scale payment system, combined with housing assistance for families traveling for treatment, made quality care accessible to all. The Hampton Street residences, rebuilt adjacent to the hospital, provided free accommodation for families during long-term treatment. The hospital staff culture evolved to reflect Sarah's compassionate approach to medicine. New training programs incorporating passages from her diary taught medical professionals to balance clinical expertise with emotional intelligence. The annual Sarah Miller Memorial Lecture Series brought leading advocates for healthcare reform to share their insights and experiences. Research protocols were completely overhauled. The Elizabeth Wilson Research Center established strict ethical guidelines for clinical trials with particular emphasis on pediatric studies. A transparent reporting system, accessible to both medical professionals and patients' families, ensured that profit motives couldn't override patient safety concerns. The transformation extended to the hospital's relationship with the surrounding community. Regular health fairs, free clinics, and educational programs helped rebuild trust with local residents. The Wilson Miller Foundation's scholarship program supported medical education for students from underprivileged backgrounds, creating a pipeline for future healthcare providers who understood the importance of compassionate care. Perhaps most touching was the creation of the Star Garden on the hospital roof. This healing space, inspired by Emma's conversations with her sky mummy, provided a peaceful retreat for patients and families. The garden included a memorial wall where families could add stars for their loved ones, creating a community of shared remembrance and hope. The medical staff, many of whom had known Sarah, found renewed purpose in these changes. They saw in the transformed institution the realization of principles she had fought to protect. Young doctors and nurses, inspired by her story, chose St. Mary's specifically for its commitment to ethical medicine and patient advocacy. The physical space itself reflected a new philosophy of healing. Natural light, comfortable gathering areas, and child-friendly spaces replaced the sterile institutional atmosphere. Art therapy rooms, meditation spaces, and family counseling centers acknowledged that healing involved more than just medical treatment. This transformation served as a model for other hospitals nationwide. Healthcare administrators visited regularly to study how St. Mary's balanced excellent medical care with human compassion. The Miller model of hospital administration became a case study in medical schools, teaching future doctors that institutional change was possible when guided by clear ethical principles. Through all these changes, Emma remained a regular presence in the hospital corridors, now not as a homeless child seeking shelter, but as a living reminder of why these reforms mattered. Her weekly visits with Robert to check on their hospital kept the staff connected to the personal story behind their institutional mission. The hospital's transformation stood as proof that tragic beginnings could lead to positive change when people dared to challenge established systems and prioritize human dignity over profit. Each new patient who entered St. Mary's benefited from the legacy of two sisters who had dared to envision a more compassionate approach to medicine. 2 years after Sarah's passing, Emma's life had found a new rhythm that honored her past while embracing her future. The penthouse apartment, once a symbol of corporate success, had transformed into a true home where family photos told the story of their unique journey. Emma's room, decorated with stars that glowed in the dark, served as a bridge between her two worlds: the loving family she had lost and the new one she had gained. Robert's transformation from ruthless businessman to devoted uncle was most evident in the small moments. Every morning began with their shared ritual: hot chocolate with extra marshmallows, stories about their Sky family, and Emma helping to pick out his tie for the day. His corporate meetings now worked around her school schedule, and his briefcase often contained both billion-dollar contracts and crayon drawings. Emma's natural empathy flourished in her new environment. She excelled at her new school, where teachers noted her extraordinary ability to comfort classmates in distress. During hospital visits, which continued weekly, she showed an innate understanding of what young patients needed: sometimes a story, sometimes just silent companionship. Dr. Fuzzy, her constant companion, became a familiar sight in hospital rooms where children faced difficult treatments. Their home life developed its own special traditions. Sunday mornings were reserved for pancake experiments, often resulting in creative shapes that told stories about their family. Monthly star parties on the penthouse roof allowed them to talk to their Sky family, with Emma insisting on updating Sarah, Elizabeth, and Catherine about every important event in their lives. Robert ensured that Emma maintained connections to both sides of her heritage. Sarah's diary became a cherished part of their bedtime routine, with age-appropriate entries helping Emma understand her mother's courage and principles. Stories about Elizabeth and Catherine helped her appreciate the aunt and cousin she had never met, but whose legacy she carried. The Wilson Miller Foundation became a family project, with Emma offering her unique perspective on helping other children in crisis. Her experiences shaped the foundation's approach to family support, ensuring that emotional needs were considered alongside practical assistance. She took special pride in helping choose books and toys for the hospital's new pediatric wing. School became a place where Emma could be both Sarah's daughter and Robert's niece. Her class presentations about family often featured stories of Earth family and Sky family working together. Her teacher noted how she used her own experience to help classmates dealing with loss or family changes, showing wisdom beyond her years. And their relationship deepened through shared challenges. Emma's occasional nightmares about losing more family members led to late-night conversations that helped both of them process their grief. Robert learned to balance protecting her with allowing her to maintain her mother's legacy of facing truth with courage. The household staff, initially uncertain how to interact with their employer's young niece, became part of their extended family. The cook learned to accommodate both sophisticated business dinners and child-friendly meals, often serving them together as Emma insisted on helping. Most Robert's business associates. The housekeeper kept a special drawer of art supplies ready for impromptu creative sessions. Emma's growth was marked by moments that brought both joy and bittersweetness. Her first lost tooth prompted a letter to her Sky mummy about the tooth fairy. Starting school led to tears about Sarah missing her first day, followed by pride in knowing she had both Earth and Heaven cheering her on. Each milestone was celebrated with acknowledgement of both present happiness and past love. Robert found himself learning as much from Emma as she learned from him. Her ability to hold both joy and sorrow, to love both present and absent family members, taught him about emotional complexity. Her matter-of-fact acceptance of their unusual family story helped him see that love transcended conventional definitions. Their life together became a testament to the power of family bonds that went beyond biological connections. Emma grew surrounded by love from her uncle, who had become a father, from the hospital staff who remained connected to their story, and from the ever-present memory of the mother who had gifted her with both her earthly and heavenly families. 5 years after Sarah's passing, Her legacy lived on in ways that touched countless lives. The Sarah and Elizabeth Miller Medical Ethics Center became a leading institution for healthcare reform, training a new generation of medical professionals who understood that compassionate care required both scientific expertise and human understanding. The center's annual conference drew healthcare leaders worldwide, all seeking to learn from the transformation sparked by two sisters' dedication to ethical medicine. The Wilson Miller Foundation expanded beyond its initial focus on medical support and housing assistance. Inspired by Emma's journey, it developed comprehensive programs supporting children facing family health crises. The Stars Above program provided counseling, educational support, and creative outlets for young people dealing with loss, while the Bridge Home initiative helped families stay together during medical treatments. Emma, now 8 years old, grew into a remarkable young person who carried forward the best of both her families. Her natural empathy, inherited from Sarah, combined with Elizabeth's passion for justice and Robert's determination to create change. She became a regular speaker at Foundation events, sharing her story with a clarity that moved even the most hardened corporate executives to tears. The impact of their story rippled through society in unexpected ways. Real estate developers began incorporating healthcare accessibility into their planning processes. Hospitals nationwide adopted versions of the Miller Protocol for family-centered care. Medical schools included Sarah's diary in their ethics curriculum, ensuring future doctors understood the human cost of prioritizing profit over patient care. Robert's transformation from corporate titan to healthcare advocate became a case study in business schools, demonstrating how personal experience could reshape corporate values. His annual lectures on ethical development and social responsibility attracted overflow crowds, but his most important audiences remained the families helped by the foundation, where Emma often joined him in presenting keys to their new homes. The Hampton Street community, once slated for destruction, flourished as a model of integrated healthcare and housing support. The residential complex, now home to both medical families and local residents, fostered connections between patients and community members. The regular events in the Sarah Miller Memorial Garden brought together people from all walks of life, united by shared experiences of illness and healing. Emma's influence on the Foundation's work ensured that children's perspectives were never forgotten in policy decisions. Her insights led to the creation of special spaces in hospitals where young patients could process their experiences through art and play. The Dr. Fuzzy Protocol for helping children cope with family illness became standard practice in pediatric wards across the country. The medical community's annual Sarah Miller Excellence in Ethics Award recognized healthcare professionals who demonstrated exceptional commitment to patient advocacy. Recipients often spoke of how Sarah's story had influenced their approach to medicine, creating a growing network of practitioners dedicated to reforming healthcare from within. As Emma grew, she began to understand more deeply the complex legacy she inherited. She carried within her the determination of two sisters who had fought to change a broken system, the love of a mother who had sacrificed everything for her principles, and the support of an uncle who had learned to value family above fortune. The story of the little girl who slept in hospital hallways became more than just a tale of personal tragedy and redemption. It stood as proof that even the most entrenched systems could change when people dared to put human dignity first. Each year, as new families found hope through the Foundation's work, the legacy of Sarah, Elizabeth, and Emma's journey touched more lives. Robert often reflected that their greatest achievement wasn't in the buildings constructed or policies changed, but in the shift in how people viewed their responsibilities to each other. The integration of compassion into corporate decision-making, of human needs into institutional policies, created ripples that continued to spread. Together, Robert and Emma maintained their evening ritual of talking to their Sky family, sharing updates about the lives they touched and the changes they created. These quiet moments served as reminders that the most profound transformations often began with simple acts of love and courage, passed down through generations and outward into the world. Dear viewers, thank you for taking the time to experience this deeply moving story about Emma, Sarah, and Robert. Their journey touches on universal themes of love, loss, redemption, and the power of family bonds that transcend conventional definitions. I would love to hear your thoughts on this emotional narrative. What aspects of the story resonated most with you? Perhaps it was Emma's resilience, Sarah's sacrifice, or Robert's transformation. How did their story impact your perspective on healthcare, corporate responsibility, and the true meaning of family? Please share your reflections in the comments below. Your insights and personal connections to the story would add valuable perspectives to our discussion. Looking forward to reading your responses.